Yeah, so just in terms of the background to the webinar, obviously there's been a fair bit of social media reaction to developments recently as a result of citizens' advice and the training materials that they released. But of course, for most of us, I think the issue is much broader than what citizens' advice has been involved in. And we want to look at the kind of structural roots of racism in charities and the extent to which there might be an issue in Scotland that could be separate from other parts of the UK as it faces charities. I don't know how much evidence there is on this at the moment, but I know there's a lot of anecdotal experiences. So it's definitely something that I think we need to explore and look into. And a number of people that are on the panel have also expressed an interest and concern around this as well. So that's the background to this session. What I'm hoping to get out of this eventually and ultimately is a bit more of investment, focused interest, a way of getting conversation started, not just within the BME-led organizations, but also right across the sector. And I'm hoping that by SCVO, ACOSVO, GCVS, and other organizations, getting engaged in this conversation, that will then help us to broaden out and take some action that will be more sustainable on this as well. So that's where I'm coming from. And if I may, I'd like to just go through to the panelists now and just get a sense from each of them very quickly on their interest in the webinar and where they've been coming from and why they're interested in this conversation. So if I could maybe start by going to Megan.
Yeah, so my name is Megan. I currently work for Firstport, a development agency for social enterprise, but my background is about a decade in the voluntary sector down south, in London, the majority of the time. My interest was, I think, a bit of a stark, you come with fresh eyes and you come back to Scotland after living in London for so long, and I think I noticed just the silence on this issue compared to a lot of noise down south and actually quite a lot of action as well. And that's why I'm interested in it, and I'm really excited that we're starting to talk about it and take some action up here.
Thanks very much, Megan. Jenny, do you want to say a few words about your how you've come into this and the work you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jenny. I work at SCVO alongside Rashir. I set up the Third Sector Women's Network maybe about a year ago, just off the back of various conversations that I was having with members in the sector around issues that women were facing within the third sector. So I guess that kind of opened my eyes to even though with the third sector we don't always walk the walk, if you like. So then when this racism stuff came up recently up here, I'll be honest, I was pretty taken aback with some of the stuff that was coming out, not in terms of representation, because I knew about that, but in terms of some of the attitudes. And I'm really interested to make sure that at SCVO we do everything we can to improve the situation, to help members improve the situation. So that's why I wanted to come along today.
Great. Okay, if you could go to Ian from GCVS.
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff. So from my perspective, I'm relatively new in post in Glasgow. It's obviously Scotland's biggest city and probably the most diverse community in Scotland. And it's quite striking, I suppose, that you start to notice the disparity that exists. Interestingly as well, I don't know if folk have picked up the research that the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights have done on boards in Glasgow. So this is charity boards in Glasgow. And they've identified, an underrepresentation of around 50%. On what you would expect based on all things being equal at board level. And I think that's really interesting, because I think if that's the leadership of the third sector, and we know what people's inherent bias is likely to do, then how likely are we to get people fairly into senior management into employment, into volunteering, and using services right across the organisations. I suppose for me, there's a bit of a challenge there about how we do some of that. And I think, as you said, you said at the start, not sure whether there is an issue. I think there is an issue. I mean, even, levels of volunteering in Scotland have been lower for as long as I've worked in the sector. I go back to working in what was Volunteer Development Scotland 12 years ago, and we knew it then. I don't think anything significantly changed since. So for me, it just feels like huge missed opportunities for society and for the sector if we don't start doing something to change that culture.
Thanks very much, Ian. And Pat, if we could go over to you now.
Sure. It's something that my board have been quite keen in looking into for a while. And initially, when ACOSVO brought out their key principles for leadership that was asking people to sign up to leadership and racial equality principles, we were keen that we did something similar in Scotland. We were having our members asking whether they should sign up to ACOSVO's one or whether we were doing something similar. So at the moment, we're very much supporting our sister organisation ACOSVO in the principles that they have and directing our members that way. But we didn't want to feel that in any way we were jumping on the bandwagon of that without looking at the situation in Scotland, because the work south of the border with ACOSVO came from some UK-wide stats that came out of some work that they've been doing, but we didn't have any sort of Scottish specific stats on the back of that. And I suppose I'm looking at making sure it's wide across the chief exec level, the senior staff level, and the governance level, so that across the leadership we're looking at what our diversity is and how we can help improve that.
That's great. So you've referenced the SCVO work as well. So Christiana, I wonder if you could say a few words as well.
Sure. I work for SCVO, which is the sister body of ACOSVO. We are a network body of about 1,200 charity leaders in England and Wales. We've had trying to achieve greater racial equality in our policy strategy as one of our kind of priority areas since early 2018. We've done some work around that, which includes the principles that Pat mentioned, and the reason we chose it as a priority is in part because we do something annually called the Pay and Equality Survey, which we've been doing for at least 10 years, which looks at some demographic data, and it consistently shows that there's not enough representation of BAME leaders in charities, and that even though there's quite a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, there's not really much in the way of progress. And so we really want to understand why that is. So I think they have got a lot better in England and Wales. I can't speak to Scotland, so I'll try and just be here to answer any questions you have about our work. But in England and Wales, there has been a lot more talk about it, but we aren't seeing progress, and the kind of racism and bias that was really well highlighted by Charity So White is remaining, and for some people saying getting worse. So what can we do to address that? And that's why that's where our stream of work's come in.
Great, thanks very much, Christiana, really useful. And just to say that we've also got my colleague Shan Lower, who's on the call. She's our communications and press officer, and she's supporting with the communications around this. So what I'd like to do now is just go straight to the participants in here, and there'll be people who want to say a few words. If I could ask you, I know there's one person who's a phone call in listener, which might be difficult to kind of ask you to put your hand up. But for those that are on the call on the webinar, could you please press the button which puts your hand up if you would like to come in at this point into the conversation and share some of your thoughts and ask any questions, or also offer some points that we can use, because I'm very aware that it's been the conversation so far is very much focused on diversity, which is an important part of it, but it might be a broader agenda here that we need to cover. So does anybody in the attendees list like to put their hands up? If you would like to put your hands up, there's a button right at the bottom under the bit that says participants or attendees on your screen. And if you click on that, you'll be able to see that. The other way you can do it is if you just kind of type in the chat as well. I'll monitor that as well. And just while I'm doing that, I just wanted to mention that one of the issues that has also come through, I think there's been some research that's been done by CRER, which is the Centre for Racial Equalities Council. I think that's what it stands for. They did some research into trustees and boards in Glasgow. They, I think their findings similarly echoed some of the work that SCVO has done. But one of the things that was quite striking is that, you know, even though there's an issue around diversity of boards for Black and ethnic minority people on boards within charities in Glasgow, there was also an intersectionality. There was an issue of particularly worse effects in terms of diversity for Black and ethnic minority in terms of gender balance and women compared to men on boards. So there might be some particular additional issues that we might need to look at, that's not just from a purely BME perspective, but also from a perspective of how it intersects with other equality areas as well. Does anybody want to, Raza, okay. There you go, Raza, you're unmuted now, go for it. Raza, you need to click the unmute button on yours. Go for it. Yeah, we can hear you now. Go for it.
Yeah, and I missed obviously start, and excuse me if I never took any information from there. But one of the questions I had in my mind, and first of all, I appreciate many organizations manage to look into this deep-rooted issues, inequalities, and charity sector, and especially on a board levels. And the few questions I have, obviously, the key players on this webinar, and what's the composition of their workforce and at the same time on their boards, and how well they are trying to tackle underrepresentation of ethnic minorities on their board and workforce. That's something, and then hopefully from there they can lobby and they can educate and encourage many member organizations to really buy into agenda of fairness.
Okay, well, I'm happy to go first on that one, Raza, if that's helpful. In terms of SCVO, our board is not that diverse. I don't think at the moment we've got any Black and ethnic minority. I'm not sure. I don't think we do. It's certainly something which has been mentioned, and it's something that I know that board members are quite keen to address. And I think all the usual barriers that we've been discussing on charity SCVO in other areas in terms of, you know, just trying to recruit a more diverse board, but then trying to get people into a structure which itself can be a barrier to people engaging. All of that probably applies to SCVO as it does to many other charities as well. We also have a policy forum, and in our policy forum we do have BME within that group, which oversees the kind of policy interests for the sector. But again, it's not as diverse as maybe certainly I would hope to see. So there is an issue certainly for SCVO. Shall we go to Pat?
Sorry, similar issue for us in terms of board diversity. Gender-wise, we have more women than men, but we don't have any BME board members. But I think it's even wider than that, because our board are elected from within our membership. And I think there's a piece of work that we need to do to look at diversity statistics within our membership that then gives us the basis for elections to the board.
Ian?
Yeah, so GCVS, it's similar to Pat identified. Our membership, our board are chosen from our membership, and if your membership is biased, then you have a challenge there. Raza is actually a board member of GCVS, but I suppose the reflection I would have as an organisation is that Raza's there, and he's not there because I don't think he's there, and he'll know the history better than I have. I don't think he's there because we did anything meaningful about thinking about how we represent our community. And I suppose that's a reflection, you know, so in a sense, I'm not, you know, in Glasgow City, you're talking about 1/6 to 1/5 of people in Glasgow are from an ethnic minority. So 1/8 of our board is, and it wasn't through a planned approach. So I'm not going to claim that's good enough from that perspective. Staffing, similar, you know, we obviously have representation, but it's not at all levels of the organisation. And again, we need to reflect on why that is, and why, you know, why we're not recruiting from across the community that we're meant to represent.
Okay, thanks very much. Christian, I'm not going to ask you about this because obviously this is looking specifically at Scottish charities, I think. But it would be good to get a reflection from Megan on what you feel, you know, just hearing that, because I think you'd raised some of these issues as well within Twitter.
I mean, yeah, I can speak from our board. We're obviously a social enterprise, but we're obviously a charity as well. I think 2 people on our board are from a BME background, I believe. But what I would say is that board diversity is a huge issue, but I would also say there's definitely something around people coming into the charity sector as well. I did 10 years ago, I did the Charity Works graduate scheme, which was only in its 2nd year then. And since then, I know they've done a lot of work trying to increase the number of people from BME communities that want to work in the charity sector. There's cultural issues around why that might be, you know, particularly for first generation immigrants, and maybe more of an uncommon route perhaps, and you know, charities aren't as big in other countries. And so they've done a lot of work on that. There's also stuff around retaining talent that come in. You know, you can recruit some really talented graduates, but if they see an all-white trustee board, everybody on your website's white, and they don't feel supported, then there's also something about retaining it. So I think there's definitely around recruitment at board, key strategic decisions are made at that level, but also I think it's important to talk about the talent coming into the charity sector as well.
Great, thanks. Just a quick reminder, if anybody would like to come in from the participants, if you could click the button that means raise your hands, or type something into the chat, that would help me to know to come to you. So please do that if you can.
Is there any chance I can add a comment to?
Yeah, go for it, Raza.
Yeah, it's obviously heard from four of the key players, and they have difficulties on their boards not having people. And I personally see myself, I'm very quite kind of active in community work, and I have a different take on volunteering from ethnic minorities. There is no shortage of volunteers from ethnic minorities, and there is no cultural reason for them not to join. There's a lot happening in a charity sector from ethnic minorities. But one thing I found, some of the bigger organizations, sometimes they might have 1 or 2, but they're not really fully utilized. They're used as a token on their boards. And that can be one of the challenge for people, maybe not really coming forward, hearing from others, well, what's the point of being there, because you're not really listened to, you're not used. But I've served on many boards, and I can echo that kind of a feeling as well. The one thing I've noticed, obviously, for organization and all the lead and multi-sector and charity sector. So what was the reason not having any organization from Glasgow or Scotland who has more knowledge on ethnic minorities?
Okay. I've also invited Khalid to come into the conversation if you would like to, because you've been typing and some things which connect with what Raza was saying. Do you want to say anything, Khalid? No? Okay.
Hi,
Right.
sorry. Hi.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's Khalida actually.
Khalida, sorry.
Khaled's the male version. Yeah, I was agreeing with you
Oh, we've lost you, Khalida. I think the sound is not very great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry.
Just keep it as close to your mouth as possible, yeah?
Yeah. So yeah, but it is often tokenistic approaches that's coming forward, and what we really needed to be looking at is more sustainable approaches and developing cultural proficiency as board members, as trustees, as directors of organisations. And if you take on a little bit of that, taking the time to self-develop yourself within cultural proficiency, then engage within these communities, you will find these communities are there for coming on the board and utilising and using their talents. Also, then you've got your young people. Young people are there that can be for the taking as well. But again, it's about investing in and liaising with the right organisations that are working on the ground with these young people. Just to avoid this tokenistic approach.
And do you feel this point's been adequately understood by, Scottish charities across the board, or do you feel it's something which is not well known, it's not well understood?
I don't think it is well understood, to be fair. I think it's quite hard when if you don't have the lived experiences of actually being recognizing what racism is, how it feels, then you're less likely to actually do something about it. So, like you could have, oh yes, we want to have a BME young person in, okay, right, they come in at the last minute, they get their picture taken, you know, there's like, we get people coming in and ordering young people, like, well, can you just get, what do you want? Do you want a black person, a hijab, a white person, a Eastern European? And this is the kind of things that often happens. But looking at the sort of lived experiences of the workforce, if you really truly can know how it feels to be isolated because of the colour of your skin, then you're more likely to reach out. So it's just about getting that, really making true contact with these young people and community leaders, and showing them the way and getting them involved in a greater capacity rather than just the icing on the cake type thing.
That's quite helpful. And one of the things that's an implication from what you're saying is that even when engaging with people who might be, have life experiences that are not captured by an organization, is that really address some of the structural issues that might push racism forward? And I think Jenny Keenan has something to say on this. She's posted something in the chat, so I'm just going to unmute you now if you want to maybe go into that a bit more.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. We weren't sure if the laptop had a microphone, so that worked. I suppose my question that I put forward was around how much do the panelists and others feel that some of these issues around particularly diversity at board level, diversification of volunteering, etc., have to do with national systemic racism and the role that it plays across all sectors, not just the third sector. And if so, is there an element where, even if we're talking about situations where we work at diversification of membership and volunteering, which are very important, there would still be work to be done around who feels, for example, that they could put themselves forward for a role, and who feels valued and who feels like they are part of the conversation, and how the wider structure and the wider society that we are in at the moment plays into that.
Great, and I think Kat has posted something on the chat which kind of resonates with that. It might help us have another lens into that. Kat, do you want to say a bit more about what? Have you got a microphone? Can you say?
Yeah, I've got a microphone. Yeah.
Go for it.
So it's something just to sort of re-emphasize what was just said then by Jenny. The phrase that I've often seen used is the idea of internalized whiteness. It's the idea that folks who are white are also affected by structures of white supremacy, but we are unwilling to actively look and engage with that, because to do that would mean that we're racist, rather than looking at it and seeing that actually internalized whiteness and white supremacy affect everybody, and we need to dismantle it as a systemic thing in order to ensure that everyone is able to actually be able to participate effectively. And that can kind of come down to the fact that, like, for most people, Raza, I think it was Raza, or was it, no, sorry, it was Khalida who was talking about the fact that tokenism is something that happens a lot in the third sector, and how people don't listen to the lived experiences of folks who have BAME. So if we're not willing to even listen to the voices of those people, then it just exacerbates the whole white supremacist thinking that underlies a lot of that.
Okay, so there's definitely an issue emerging here about some of the actions that we might take to address this that can come across as very tokenistic. It's more about hearing than really listening, and that there's something here about the more systemic causes which reproduce this kind of racism, which we haven't quite got to the bottom of, and is certainly not as well known. Can I just ask you, Kat, just in turn to clarify on that one, could you say a little bit more about what you mean by the systemic approach? What does that look like?
So I think there's a couple of ways that you can look at that. Either you can look at it from the historical context, which I think is helpful if you want to look at it like for academic reasons, or there's more of what I would sort of see as modern day structures, which are a bit of a problem. Like the fact that most folks who identify within BME communities might be unwilling, like we've talked about retention as an example, but why stay in an organization where A, you can't see yourself, B, racist act against you aren't taken so seriously because it's like, you know, people don't recognize that asking to touch someone's hair or just touching somebody's hair to see the texture and quality of it is a racist act. But people will put that down to just being like, oh, that's just inappropriate. No, it's racist. It's not like the same as being part of the KKK, for instance, but it is still a racist act because you're not treating that person as a human being. So I think that there's this really big thing where people want to see racism in an absolute term of a really, really bad thing, when actually it's all those mini microaggressions that take place that reinforce that structured racism.
Okay, that's helpful. Khalida, you've made a point as well about a couple of points actually about deeper understanding, types of training, and also you know, Raza has also mentioned that structural inequalities can actually be a cause of tokenism. So, Khalida, do you want to say a little bit more about your ideas here?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, with the cultural proficiency training, it's all about levels of cultural proficiency within an organisation. You have your cultural destructiveness at the bottom, and then you've got your cultural proficiency at the top. We actually deliver cultural proficiency training to teachers and organisations who are willing, who are looking to get a deeper understanding of what we as professionals need to do to encourage more discussion and talks, and what's seen as racist and what's not, just a little bit of deeper understanding. And for example, so the cultural proficiency destructiveness is when white teachers are perhaps speaking about like teaching in a way that is that's really destructive, as in saying the N-word over and over again to a room full of white students, where you've got 3 Sudanese boys around 14 years old, how that makes them feel. And that's cultural destructiveness, and it's about educating and training yourself and taking a little bit more of an action on your own self-development and thinking, right, okay, that's not right. I could do it better that way. Then you've got cultural proficiency, where you're not, where you have a deeper understanding about, okay, so this person is a Sikh, it's a woman, she might not be, she might have cultural barriers to coming to meeting for a coffee or meeting for, it's just having this deeper knowledge. And the only way you're going to have this deeper knowledge is getting to know the community at a deeper level.
Okay, just while we're staying on this level, I mean, it'd be really useful, Christiana, if you could maybe say a few words about how you've been engaging with, some of these kind of approaches. I mean, you've been looking at what works in this from a SCVO's perspective. Is there anything you can share with us from your perspective on this?
I think I just agree with what Khalida and Raza and Kat have said. It is a system problem, and I think it's reflective of the fact that we live in an unequal and still racist society, and that's obviously reflected in health outcomes, in justice outcomes, in equality of opportunity. And I think for one of the problems, and this was discussed during the charity, so White Campaign, one of the people who contributed there, is that I think for some time charities and third sector organisations have felt that because we do good and we're here to do good stuff, we don't need to kind of take that critical lens and really examine how we are a product of the systems that we were raised and culturalised in, and how to unpick those systems. So if we want to kind of really change things, to take a phrase from a colleague of mine who works for the infrastructure body representing BAME communities in England, we need to change the song and not just the singer. And some of the stuff we're trying to do here through projects like Making Diversity Count, we're going to try a pilot program with CEO and chairs to help them unpick their own bias, which is starting kind of next year. So some stuff around generating that deeper understanding.
That's really helpful. I mean, there's a bit of a challenge here to organizations who have got a fair bit of influence, such as SCVO, ACOSVO, GCVS. Pat, I was wondering if you might want to come in and just, give us a sense of what you think organizations like ACOSVO can do to, start to unpack this issue within Scotland in a way which is, not trying to, own the territory, but is working with BME-led organisations and others to try and help unpick this and see a way forward.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a collaborative approach that's needed, but I think there's definitely something about the leadership angle on it. I think it's how we lead our organisations to be, to have an inclusive environment, to make sure that we get the training that we need to address some of the issues, and that it's not just tokenism, that we collectively look at the sector. I think there's a need to do a little bit of research of what the situation is so that we can actually address it with some facts and figures. But I think there's also, good practice sharing that can happen, and I'm pleased that Katrina's joined us from ACOSVO, because we can look at what we're each doing and how we can learn from each other in terms of how we approach it.
Okay, and Ian, from a GCVS perspective, I guess, or even from your own perspective, just, there's facts and figures. Some of them are, have been produced already in Glasgow. But from your perspective, do we have what we need to as, influential organizations to start to kind of, work collaboratively with others on this in a positive way?
I think a couple of, just very quickly, I suppose, share a couple of folks kind of talked about the element of, is this just a symptom of a wider societal thing? And to an extent it probably is, but I suppose my immediate response is just, if we can't get this right in our sector, there's, where is it going to be led? Where's it going to be led from? If not us? And I mean, as in the whole sector and communities. From an individual, an organisation like ours, I think there's a lot for us to do about understanding the issue before we can take action on it. It's a lot of learning from our perspective in doing that, but I am clear that I don't want to be part of a voluntary sector that doesn't change. And I am clear that as an organisation, we have a role in demonstrating what good looks like to others. And that probably is as much as I can say at the moment.
Is that kind of facilitator role, Ian?
I think it's a double thing. I mean, if you think about what an organisation like ours does, we are at a very basic level. You know, we are in and we will support organisations in terms of recruiting trustees, how you do that, and how you look at diversity on your board, and how you look at measuring your impact and measuring your equalities. But it's also about a leadership role of organisations like us, like ACOSVO, like SCVO, leading by example and challenging poor and challenging those that don't adopt the right type of approach.
Thanks, Ian. That makes sense. Megan, go for it. You can unmute yourself.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you
So
go.
I'm just conscious we're running out of time a wee bit, and I just wanted to flag up that some of these discussions, you know, some of them echo things that I've heard for a long time in the voluntary sector, and I just think now is a really rich opportunity. We've had this, you know, the whole Charities So White, you know, movement. People are mobilising. They're saying, "What can we do? Are we going to sign up to this commitment?" And I think Scotland is, you know, one of the huge benefits of Scotland is that there's huge appetite for change. We're small enough, we're nimble enough that we can be really ambitious and move quite quickly. And I'd like the outcome of maybe this discussion and this webinar is to be maybe some concrete ambitions, some concrete timelines and commitments. There's some great examples of best practice. You know, we've talked about training and things like that, board recruitment. There's other things that I think are really great. So down south, they have this thing called Great Charity Speakers. So they have a list of people who are female or from a person of colour. And so if you're organising a conference or a panel and you say you can't find anybody from those groups, there's a list there, but it's quite thin on the ground in terms of Scottish people. Do we want to add Scottish people? Do we want to have our own? So I think there's maybe new things that we could try, and it would be great, you know, if we can think of some new ideas with some concrete timelines. Maybe.
But to these concrete timelines, in terms of leading and being more proactive, as you know, in terms of leadership organisations and so on, where is that located? Where should that be? Where do people go in order to get involved in that and to build those timelines and to resource it and so on? Where's the space for it, and who should create that space? Go for it, Megan, have you got any ideas?
So, big question. I don't know. I think we need to have a response. I think the reason I tweeted in the first place was the silence from Scotland, or the perceived silence. I know there was a lot going on, but, you know, I think some of the umbrella organisations, SCVO, potentially, you know, the umbrella organisations in social enterprise, like ACOSVO, we need to have a response to everything that's going on. This whole Charities So White thing is a massive opportunity for us to be like, this is how we respond. And it might be that we go away and we think about it, but I think there should be a concrete response. Or maybe it's individuals from people, you know, people of colour in Scotland that want to come together and do that. Maybe it doesn't need to be the umbrella organisations. Maybe it's more of a grassroots thing. I don't know, but I think something needs to happen soon.
That's helpful. I mean, just to say that SCVO's Chief Executive Officer, Anna Fowley, is now in the call as well. And just while she gets a measure of the conversation and has a look at the chat and so on, if I could just maybe ask Jenny if there are parallels here with the work done to tackle, you know, gender inequality that you've been working on that we can learn from.
I guess just in the sense that also seems to be a bit of a structural problem in terms of unconscious bias that people have, and certainly wouldn't equate the two. I think race is much more of an issue in Scotland than gender inequality, but yeah, certainly in terms of trying to, what can we do as a sort of support to support people who are faced by those barriers. And then also how do we address the structural inequalities. And I guess those are two different strands and we need to follow both of them.
Great, thanks very much. Anna, thanks very much for joining. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of where the conversation has gone. Obviously, it's been a very quick fire conversation. We never intended this to be the full conversation that needs to take place with a much wider group of people in a bigger space. But it's been the start of something, and we have rehearsed a few ideas and lines and concepts that have come forward, particularly, the dangers of tick box approaches to tackling racism, how structural inequality can sometimes lead to tick box types mentalities and the kind of tokenism based mentalities, which is something that we need to move away from. There's been a bit of a discussion around how do we actually tackle that structural side of it. And while there's been some great work done by a number of organizations, it's not always very visible. And as a result of that, I think some of the reflections, something I've got on the conversation so far, is that there is an opportunity for a bit of a leadership role from those organizations in the charity sector in Scotland that have a bit more influence, have the most influence. And we are talking here about like organizations like SCVO, ACOSVO, GCVS, and others, to take a bit of a leadership by example approach, but working collaboratively with those that have already been producing the resources, the lists of people, the case studies, and so on. But there's a bit of a challenge to organizations like us. What are we going to do about this? What is our opportunity to get involved in that? Is there anything you'd like to say, Anna? Anything about your thoughts on what we might be able to do, or what, in terms of taking some of the momentum forward on this? Anna, can you hear us? No, I don't think we can hear you, Anna. So, just while just give me a shout, just shout out when you feel you've got the audio connected. But in the meantime, I'm just going to double check if there's anybody else who's not had a chance to come in, that so to speak. If you could just raise your hand.
If no one else has a point, I'll be happy to add a few more comments.
Okay. Yep.
It's my own personal experience and working in a community for long and tackling inequalities. And sometimes some main organizations, they like to go in alliance with some gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers might offer a nice tick box because we're working with such and such. But the real change will not be delivered. On a second note, on unconscious bias, I personally believe that's another kind of a shield to delay inequalities rather than tackling a head-on. I think so. We were seen as a champion in community, especially third sector and the charities. But obviously, with this research and a conversation we are having, we're obviously failing certain community members. And we believe in the communities are the asset for any country to develop and progress. But I can see some of the challenges mentioned about youth. I personally run an organization, and a youth are 70%, 60% of committee members. I think that sometimes what we need to really learn is take a head-on approach, take people on, develop them. Even we are talking about underrepresentation, those who are on these charities board, are they really progressing to become chairs, vice chairs? Are they really? It's not happening. And even public sector, 50-50 duty, I think so that's failing as well, especially for ethnic minorities, female.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm still processing what you've said there, but certainly, just to highlight that Anna can hear us, but she can't switch her mic on at the moment. But she is listening to the conversation. I suppose, from my perspective, I just wanted to, we're coming to the end of the webinar here. I just want to say that, from my perspective, I'm really keen that this conversation does go to the next level. There are opportunities to do so. I think one of the issues which I'm picking up from Raza is that there's sometimes, you know, the issue you mentioned about gatekeepers, it's something I've been quite aware of as well. Don't expect that just because somebody's from the BME community, that means they all get along together and they're like a homogeneous group and they all talk to each other, and there can be lots of competition and infighting within the groups as well, just as in any other kind of equality scenario as well. So just be aware of that. That doesn't mean that you just step back and say, look, you know, we're not going to deal with this because they can't sort themselves out or something like that, because that itself can then reinforce the whole kind of structural issues that we're trying to tackle in the first place. So I think there is an opportunity for a leadership role. I think we probably do need to take Megan's you know, suggestions here, but how we develop that, how we take that forward, I'm not quite sure at this stage. But it would be good to get some reflections off the back of this webinar. And just to say that what I'm planning to do is to put this recording up onto YouTube, share it around, you know, make it public so people can observe. And there's been a couple of people that have asked if they can watch the recording. Of course, if anybody has any issues with what they've said and doesn't want that to happen, just let me know and we can explore that. But otherwise, tomorrow I plan to make it publicly available. I think we've taken the conversation as far as we can within the time we have available right now, but I think it's given us a good starting point and a good momentum within Scotland to get this conversation started. So for now, if I could just thank all of you for participating in the call. Apologies if you didn't have a chance to contribute for whatever reason, technical or if you didn't feel that you could come into the conversation at this stage. But certainly, you know, I very much hope that if this conversation thrives and continues, we can start moving into an action planning stage really quickly in the same way that Megan has suggested. So thanks to all of you for joining, and hope you all have survived the next few days of all the craziness that's going on around here at the moment with the Brexit and everything else. And in the meantime, yeah, bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.